Hello, my name is Kevin Tolles, and this is my Digital Platform 3 blog on the article that I found during my scavenger hunt. Previously, we discussed a literature review, but this time we will discuss the article in full. And that article, to remind you, is How Violent Video Games Communicate Violence, which is featured in the Communication Monographs, Volume 81, Number 3, from September 2014. Now, last time we discussed distortion of consequences, dehumanization, and moral justification, but what I was later found out recently was these topics were heavily discussed in the main article and were not actually part of the literature review. They were touched on briefly, but what the literature review actually said was, quote, no study has systematically analyzed the prevalence of moral disengagement factors in violent video games. And while it did briefly reference some other factors, like the ones that we discussed in my previous vlog, it didn't go very far beyond this. So the literature review was actually pretty short. And yeah, and I did my literature review on this, it would have been very short. And it wouldn't have been as detailed as the blog that I gave last week. So let's go into the other factors that were discussed uh, that accompanied the dehumanization and the distortion of consequences and everything else. Euphemistic labeling, which is downplaying violence with humor, with jokes, with funny situations, and as the study says, 60% of the games that they had analyzed had some amount of humor. So normally, when like you're killing someone in this violent video game, normally it would be pretty awkward. You will probably be feeling anxious, but it uses jokes and humor. There's really not much more detail to it. It's just a mechanic to downplay the situation and make the game more entertaining and less anxious. Attribution of blame, which is blaming someone other than the player for the violence that they're doing, such as an authority figure or um, usually the victim or the bad guy. End game is to beat some bad guy in these games that are action driven and story driven. So this is really big on victim blaming. Quote, they deserved what they got, using karma as a moral factor, justifying the violence by saying, hey, he's the bad guy, he's trying to do this, 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 and this, which is like bad guy things. He's trying to take over the world or trying to hold someone hostage. So he's to blame or she's to blame that we got in there and we shot him. Diffusion of responsibility. Now, this is pretty different because this is very big in multiplayer games. You won't see this much in single player shooters or single player violent games, which is usually just shifting the blame in general, which usually is an authority figure if you're playing a single player game. But in multiplayer, like everyone gets a piece of the action. Everyone has this big objective that they have to get to, and if one of your comrades or other players on your team gets the kill, then it's easy to pin the blame on them in the story, or if there's some sort of feeling about what's going on, where someone needs to be blamed for this. It's very easy to blame your teammates in a multiplayer situation. And all of these fall under this umbrella term known as moral disengagement, which was touched on in the literature review earlier in this vlog, but it's by definition is social psychology term, which is a process in which an individual convinces himself or herself that the ethical standards in a certain situation do not apply, which is very home hitting for video games and all of the terms that we discussed, shifting blame, downplaying the violence, blaming the bad guy. This is all for entertainment reasons, just to make the game more entertaining and to push forward that the violence is okay as long as it's against this bad guy, this big bad, this person that you conceive as the bad guy. And it tricks people into thinking, in young minds at that being violent against someone or something is fine as long as, by society terms, in social psychology, they're viewed as savages, they're the bad guy, they deserve it, they need it. If you don't do this, no one else will, and all of these other people are just going to suffer. And that's the main theme of this article, moral disengagement. And it plays really well into the social psychological tradition of communication theory, which is heavily touched on in the theories of human communication. So I learned something new about this article while reading it all the way through. So, and that's it. This is this is how this article drives home the point that violent video games communicate violence, and the evidence is there if you're willing to listen. Thanks for watching.